21, you can hear it right now if you listen. That little creek behind your property, the one that runs along the back fence, or cuts through the low end of the pasture, or trickles under that old culvert by the barn. You've heard it 1,000 evenings. You've walked past it with a coffee mug in your hand and never once thought of it as a power plant. $40. That's what stands between you and a quiet little generator that runs day and night, no gas, no grid, no monthly bill. A 5-gallon bucket, 30 feet of pipe you probably already own, and a turbine no bigger than your fist. There's a reason the Amish in Lancaster County have been pulling electricity from creeks smaller than yours for generations, and it has nothing to do with water wheels. The real question isn't whether your creek can make power. It can. The question is how much, and the answer depends on something you can measure with a garden hose and a yardstick in about 20 minutes. But here's what nobody in the solar industry will ever sit you down and explain about moving water versus sunlight. Before I get into the how, let me say something. If you're the kind of person who hears $40 and no monthly bill, and your first instinct is to go check what your creek looks like right now, you belong here. This is where we talk about the quiet, plain, real ways to take a little bit of your independence back. If that sits right with you, you might consider sticking around. And if you've got a creek or a spring on your land, I want to hear about it before this is over. But first, let me show you what that water is already doing. There's a man I heard about through a fella in the Appalachian homesteading community. I'll call him Glenn. Glenn had 43 acres in West Virginia, most of it hillside timber, and a creek that ran along the bottom of his property year-round. Not a river, not a waterfall, just a steady little creek, maybe 3 feet wide, ankle deep in summer, a little fuller come spring. He'd owned that land for 31 years, built a cabin on it, ran solar panels for a while, then a Honda generator when the clouds came in for weeks at a time. He told his neighbor once that the creek was too small to do anything with. That neighbor didn't say much, just handed him a 5-gallon bucket and a stopwatch. What Glenn did that Saturday morning changed how he thought about his land. He walked to the narrowest point of his creek, stuck that bucket under the flow, and timed it. Filled in 42 seconds. That's roughly 7 gallons a minute. Not a torrent, not dramatic. But he wrote the number down and kept walking, because the second thing he needed to measure was even simpler, and it's the one most people never think to check. He needed to know how far that water falls from one end of his property to the other. Not how fast, not how wide, how far down. That vertical drop has a name in the hydro world. They call it head, and it's the single most important number between you and free electricity. Here's how you measure it yourself, and you don't need a survey crew or a transit or a college degree. You need a garden hose, a yardstick, and one other person. Stretch a 20-foot length of hose along your creek, starting upstream. Have your helper hold the upstream end underwater, just below the surface. You hold the other end and slowly raise it until water stops flowing out. Measure the height between your end of the hose and the water's surface. That's your head for that 20-foot stretch. Walk it downstream, repeat. Add the measurements together. It takes maybe 20 minutes and a pair of boots you don't mind getting muddy. Glenn measured 80 feet of drop over about 1,100 feet of creek. He didn't believe it at first. Went back and measured again. Now here's where it gets interesting, and this is the part that separates useful knowledge from wishful thinking. There's a simple formula, and I'm going to give it to you in plain English. Take your gallons per minute, multiply it by your feet of head, divide by roughly 6. That gives you a rough estimate of your watts. Glenn's numbers, 7 gallons a minute, 80 feet of drop. 7 times 80 is 560, divide by 6. That's about 93 watts on paper. Real-world friction, pipe losses, and turbine efficiency will cut that number. Maybe he gets 60, maybe 70. But here's what matters. That's 60 watts running every hour of every day. Not just when the sun's out, not just when the wind blows. Every single hour. Let me put that in terms you can feel. 60 watts running 24 hours a day gives you 1,400 watt hours in a day. That's enough to keep LED lights running in every room of a cabin. It's enough to charge a phone, run a radio, keep a couple of 12-volt fans turning, and trickle charge a battery bank that can handle bigger draws when you need them. It won't run your air conditioner, won't power your well pump, but it will keep the lights on when the grid goes dark, and it will do it silently, all night through a thunderstorm in January. No gas can, no pull cord, no noise. Just the creek doing what it was already doing before you showed up. And this is where the Amish part comes in. And I want to be honest about this because there's a lot of myth floating around and not enough truth. In many plain communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana, small water-driven systems have been quietly running for decades, not the big wooden water wheels you see in picture books. Those are beautiful, but they're slow, expensive, and complicated. What many Amish workshops actually use is something far simpler. A small turbine, sometimes no bigger than a coffee can, fitted into a pipe that channels the creek's natural drop. Some build them from repurposed car alternators and PVC fittings. Some buy cheap imported units. The principle is the same. You're not fighting the water. You're giving it a path and putting a spinner in the way. The reason you've probably never heard about this approach has nothing to do with secrecy and everything to do with economics. There's no recurring revenue in a $40 turbine. There's no subscription model. There's no company sending you a monthly statement. A solar company can sell you $15,000 worth of panels, an inverter, a monitoring app, and a 20-year financing agreement. A creek turbine is a one-time purchase and an afternoon of work. It doesn't need firmware updates. It doesn't need an internet connection. It needs moving water and gravity, both of which are free and have been working reliably for a few billion years. But I don't want to mislead you because the honest part matters more than the exciting part. A $40 pico-hydro turbine is a real thing. You can find them right now, small 12-volt DC inline units, rated anywhere from 10 to 50 watts, depending on your flow and your head. They work. But they work within limits, and if I don't tell you those limits, I'm no better than the salesman I just criticized. That $40 gets you the turbine and the basic fittings. The pipe, the wiring, the charge controller, and the battery are additional. Many folks already have most of that sitting in the barn or the garage. If you don't, you're looking at another $50 to $80 for the full setup. Still cheap, still real, but not $40 out the door for the whole system. I owe you that clarity. So here's where we stand. You know how to measure your head. You know how to measure your flow. You know the formula. And you know this isn't magic. It's just physics dressed in work clothes. What you don't know yet is exactly what to buy, how to put it together, and where to put it in the creek. That's the next piece, and it starts with a trip to the fastest, narrowest stretch of water on your land. Glenn didn't order anything fancy. He didn't call a contractor. He didn't spend 3 weeks reading forums. He drove to the hardware store on a Tuesday, spent about 20 minutes in the plumbing aisle, and came home with a 10-foot length of 2-inch PVC pipe, 2 hose clamps, a tube of PVC cement, and a roll of 14-gauge wire. He already had a 12-volt deep cycle battery in his shed, the one from his old trolling motor that hadn't been on the water in 4 years. The turbine itself he ordered from one of those online retailers. A small 12-volt DC inline unit about the size of a soup can with threaded fittings on both ends. $32 with shipping. It arrived in a plain brown box 6 days later. Nothing impressive to look at. Just a little cylinder with a wire coming out of it. Here's the build, and I'm going to walk you through it the way someone would explain it standing next to you at the creek. You start at the fastest, narrowest point in your stream. That's your intake. You want the water to be moving with some purpose, not pooling, not spreading wide and lazy, but pushing through a tight spot the way it does when a creek squeezes between 2 rocks or drops over a little ledge. That's where your pipe goes in. You set the upstream end of the PVC into the flow, angled slightly downhill. Some folks use a small rock dam, just a few stones stacked to funnel the water toward the pipe opening. You're not blocking the creek. You're borrowing a portion of it. The rest flows right past like it always has. Now you run that pipe downhill. This is your penstock, a word that sounds more complicated than it is. It's just the pipe that carries water from the high point to the low point, building pressure as it drops. The more vertical distance between where the water enters the pipe and where it exits through the turbine, the more pressure you get. That pressure is what spins the turbine. Glenn ran about 40 feet of pipe along a natural slope beside his creek, dropping roughly 15 feet over that distance. Not his full 80 feet of head. He didn't need it for this small setup. 15 feet of drop and 7 gallons a minute through a 2-inch pipe was plenty to spin that little unit hard enough to matter. At the bottom of the pipe, you attach the turbine, thread it on, tighten the hose clamps, and make sure the connection is snug enough that water pushes through the turbine rather than leaking around it. The turbine has 2 wires coming out, positive and negative, just like anything else that runs on 12 volts. You run those wires to a cheap charge controller. These cost $5 to $8 and keep the battery from overcharging. The charge controller connects to the battery. The battery connects to whatever you want to power. That's the whole circuit. Pipe, turbine, 2 wires, charge controller, battery. Glenn did the entire installation on a Saturday afternoon between lunch and supper. He used PVC cement on 3 joints, stripped 2 wire ends with a pocket knife, and tightened 4 hose clamps with a flathead screwdriver. No special tools, no electrical panel, no permits filed. Let me stop here and talk about what a setup like this actually produces, because I'd rather give you a number that's real than a number that's impressive. Glenn's little turbine, with 15 feet of head and 7 gallons a minute flowing through it, put out roughly 12 to 15 watts. Not 50, not 100, 12 to 15. That sounds small until you remember that it never stops. 15 watts multiplied by 24 hours is 360 watt hours a day. Over a week, that's over 2,500 watt hours sitting in his battery. That's enough to run a string of LED lights in his cabin every evening, charge his phone and his wife's phone, or a small radio, and keep a 12-volt fan running on hot nights. He told his neighbor it felt like someone had quietly turned the cabin back on. Now, if you've got more head or more flow than Glenn, your numbers go up. A setup with 30 feet of drop and 15 gallons a minute can realistically push 40 to 50 watts continuous through one of these small turbines. That's over a kilowatt hour a day. That starts to get into chest freezer territory, especially if you're running it into a decent battery bank. And if you want to go bigger, 100 watts, 200, 500, the equipment exists, but the price climbs with it. A proper Harris turbine or a stream engine unit, purpose-built for micro-hydro, will run you anywhere from $800 to $2,000. Those are serious machines for serious setups with significant head and flow. But the principle is identical. Pipe, drop, spinner, wire, battery. The $40 version and the $2,000 version are cousins, not strangers. I want to address something that comes up every time this topic surfaces, and it's the question of permits and water rights. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not going to pretend to be one. Here's what I can tell you. In most states, a small pico-hydro system on your own property, one that doesn't dam the creek, doesn't divert the full flow, and doesn't sell power to the grid, falls below the regulatory threshold that would require a federal permit from FERC. But water rights are handled at the state level, and they vary widely. Some western states treat every drop of surface water as a public resource, even if it crosses your land. Some eastern states follow riparian rights, meaning if the water touches your property, you have a reasonable right to use it. The safe move is to call your county engineer or your state energy office before you build anything permanent. For a small portable setup like Glenn's PVC pipe and a removable turbine, most folks aren't drawing attention or running afoul of anything. But I owe it to you to say, check first. A 10-minute phone call is cheaper than a fine. Here's what Glenn didn't do, and this matters as much as what he did. He didn't try to power his whole house. He didn't run extension cords through the yard. He didn't tell the power company he was going off-grid. He set up a small, quiet, independent system that gives his cabin a layer of resilience it didn't have before. When the ice storm knocked out power from his county for 4 days 2 winters back, Glenn had lights. He had a way to charge his phone. He had a radio pulling in weather reports. His neighbor with the expensive whole house generator ran out of gas on day 3. Glenn's creek just kept running. It didn't care about the ice. It didn't need a fuel delivery. It did what it has always done, and for the first time, Glenn was paying attention. So now you know the build. You know the limits. You know what it costs and what it won't do. But there's a piece of this that goes deeper than any one turbine or any one Saturday project, and it's the piece I think about most when I hear that creek running outside. Here's what the solar salesman and the power company will never volunteer. And this is the thing I promised you at the beginning. A creek runs at night, it runs in the rain, it runs in January when the days are short and the sky is gray for weeks. A solar panel gives you power maybe 6 good hours a day if you're lucky, if the angle is right, if nobody parks a cloud over your house. And even then it drops to 0 the moment the sun does. A creek gives you power every second of every day as long as the water moves. That's not a knock on solar. Solar has its place. But if you've got moving water on your land and nobody ever told you what it could do, while somebody was happy to quote you $15,000 for a rooftop system and a 20-year loan, that silence wasn't accidental. There's no financing package on a $40 turbine. There's no app to sell you. There's no monthly monitoring fee. I think about my grandfather sometimes when this subject comes up. He never used the word hydro in his life. He didn't know what a kilowatt hour was, but he understood water. He understood that a creek running downhill is work being done, and that work doesn't stop because you go to sleep. He had a spring house on his property that used gravity and cold running water to keep milk and butter cool decades before rural electrification reached his road. Nobody taught him that. He just watched the water and asked himself what it could do. That habit, that way of looking at what's already in front of you before you write a check to somebody else, is the thing that's been lost. The turbine doesn't give it back. The turbine is just the first thing it gives back once you start looking again. And that's the real Amish principle underneath all of this, if we're being honest about it. It isn't one trick or one gadget. It's a posture toward the world. In many plain communities, the first question isn't, what can I buy to solve this? It's, what do I already have that does the job? The creek, the gravity, the drop, the pipe in the barn, the battery in the shed. The knowledge that water falls and spin makes current, and current fills a battery, and a battery keeps the lights on. None of that is hidden. None of that is secret. It's just quiet. It doesn't advertise. It doesn't show up in your feed. It's sitting out there behind your house right now, doing exactly what it's been doing since before the house was built, waiting for somebody to take it seriously. If you've got a creek on your property, or a spring, or a culvert, or even a good drainage run that flows strong after rain, I'd like to hear about it. How much drop do you think you have? Have you ever walked it with a hose and a yardstick? Have you ever stuck a bucket under the flow and timed it? Tell me in the comments. I'm not asking because I'm curious about numbers. I'm asking because every time somebody measures their creek for the first time, something shifts. They stop seeing it as scenery and start seeing it as a partner. That shift matters more than any turbine I can point you toward. I want to say one more thing about Glenn, and then I'll let you go. He told his neighbor, the same one who handed him the bucket and the stopwatch, that the strangest part wasn't the electricity. It wasn't the lights in the cabin or the phone charging on the shelf. The strangest part was walking out to his porch in the evening and hearing the creek, the same creek he'd heard for 31 years, and realizing it had been talking to him the whole time. He just hadn't been listening. I don't know if that's literally true or if Glenn was being poetic. Doesn't matter. The point landed. The water was always doing the work. The only thing missing was the pipe and the attention. There's a version of this for almost everybody who owns a piece of land with moving water. Maybe your version is 12 watts and a string of lights. Maybe it's 50 watts and a chest freezer. Maybe it's just the knowledge that if the grid goes down Tuesday night, you've got a creek that doesn't care about the grid. Whatever your version is, it starts the same way. Walk out back, listen, then go get a bucket and a stopwatch. Everything after that is just plumbing. If this is the kind of thing that sits right with you, plain knowledge, real numbers, no sales pitch, no hype, we put out something like this every week. Quiet stuff, useful stuff, the kind of thing your grandfather would have nodded at. You're welcome here anytime. Next one coming is about a $6 gravity-fed water filter. An old-timer in West Virginia showed me how to build from 2 5-gallon buckets and a handful of sand. No filters to replace, no electricity needed. Just clean water coming out the bottom, slow and steady. I think you'll want to see that. Your creek's still running out there. Might be time to go listen to it.